The ghost of the Valentine Ball. The envelope was like no other Eleanor had seen. Crimson wax sealed it with an elaborate insignia, a heart pierced by a dagger. The paper was heavy, almost leathery, its edges fraying as though it had been through centuries of handling. She found it on her desk when she returned from a late dinner, the small newsroom eerily empty. No one had seen who had delivered it. The words inside, written in a hand both delicate and urgent, read, "Eleanor Albright, you are cordially invited to the Valentine's Ball at Thornrose Manor, February 13th, 8 p.m. Your presence is greatly anticipated." There was no RSVP, no indication of the sender. The date struck her as odd. Why not Valentine's Day itself? Thornrose Manor was infamous in local lore, an estate long abandoned after a fire had gutted it decades ago. No one spoke of rebuilding it, and it was said to be cursed, a haven for restless spirits. Yet Eleanor couldn't dismiss the invitation, nor the strange allure it held. Storm clouds swirled as she arrived at the manor, the road twisting through skeletal trees like a path to another world. Rain had begun to fall, slashing against her windshield, and the old iron gates stood ajar as if waiting for her. She hesitated before driving through. The headlights illuminated the imposing structure, a shadow of its former glory, its stone facade pocked with age, ivy clawing its way up like a strangling hand. Thornrose stood dark against the night, save for the faint glow of candlelight flickering behind shattered windows. The invitation in her hand felt unnaturally warm. Her journalistic instincts clashed with a primal fear deep in her gut. She convinced herself it was the perfect story, an exclusive Valentine's Ball in the town's most haunted place. It would practically write itself. Inside, the air was thick with dampness and decay, but the grand ballroom defied the rot. Its floor was polished, reflecting a canopy of chandeliers ablaze with light. Velvet curtains hung pristine over cracked walls, and roses, impossibly fresh, adorned every surface. Guests, adorned in opulent gowns and tailored suits, glided about like ghosts of another era. Their laughter was subdued, their faces pale, as if lit by moonlight rather than flame. Eleanor felt out of place. Her modest black dress clung to her in the oppressive warmth of the room. A woman passed by her, trailing a scent of lilac and something sharper, metallic. The woman's eyes met Eleanor's, and a chill shot through her. They were hollow, almost luminescent, like twin moons reflecting a void. "Welcome, Miss Albright," a voice purred. Eleanor turned sharply to find a man standing uncomfortably close, his smile too wide, his eyes an unnatural shade of gray. "Victor," he said, bowing slightly. "We've been expecting you." Victor's hand was cool and dry as it clasped hers, leading her deeper into the ballroom. Eleanor noted the strange stillness of the other guests as they turned to watch her. It wasn't polite curiosity. It was hungry, eager, as though she were a delicacy served on a silver platter. "I'm here as an observer," she stammered. "I was invited, but, I wasn't sure." Victor's smile widened. "And observe you shall. But first, a dance." Before she could object, he led her to the center of the ballroom. The music shifted, the violins keening in a mournful waltz. Eleanor felt every eye on her as Victor placed a hand on her waist, his touch feather-light yet firm. The moment their steps began, the room seemed to tilt. The air thickened, the candlelight flickered, and Eleanor's head swam. She tried to focus on the rhythm, but the world around her blurred. Victor's gray eyes locked onto hers, and she felt as though he were peeling back her defenses, peering into the very marrow of her soul. "You move beautifully," he murmured, though her feet stumbled against the polished floor. His steps were effortless, almost predatory. The ballroom transformed in flashes. One moment it was gilded and radiant, filled with laughter and music. The next, it was a ruin, cold stone, skeletal chandeliers, and damp shadows stretching like claws. Eleanor's pulse quickened, and she tried to pull away, but Victor's grip tightened. "Where are you from, Miss Albright?" he asked, his tone pleasant, yet laced with something darker. "Here, Greenville," she managed, her voice trembling. "Greenville." He rolled the name on his tongue as if savoring it. "Ah, yes, a charming little town. How long have you been there?" "All my life." "A pity," he said, his smile fading into something unreadable. "It means you never truly left." The dance ended abruptly, and the room snapped back to its gilded facade. Eleanor stumbled back, her breath hitching. Victor reached for her, but she backed away, colliding with a woman who steadied her with a cold hand. "Careful," the woman said, her voice lilting and strange. "Victor's charm has a way of ensnaring." Eleanor forced a smile, her heart hammering. The woman's face was unsettlingly perfect, like a porcelain doll come to life. Her dark eyes flicked to Victor, who was now retreating toward the shadows. "I don't belong here," Eleanor whispered. "Few of us do," the woman replied with a faint smile. "But belonging has little to do with it." The night pressed on, but Eleanor's unease deepened. Whispers trailed her steps, their source always just out of sight. Her reflection in the ballroom's gilded mirrors seemed off. Its movements lagged, her expressions sharper than intended. When the clock struck 10, the candles dimmed. A ripple of anticipation spread through the guests, and the whispers grew louder. Eleanor realized, with dawning dread, that she wasn't just a guest. She was the main attraction. The clock's chime resonated like a heartbeat, reverberating through Eleanor's ribs. A peculiar stillness gripped the ballroom as the music stopped mid-note. Guests turned toward the grand staircase at the far end of the room, their gazes vacant but expectant, as though awaiting a decree. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the faint rustle of Eleanor's dress as she shifted uneasily. Victor emerged at the top of the stairs, his pale hands clasped behind his back. His presence commanded the room, and though his lips were curled in a genteel smile, his eyes glinted with something sharp and unspoken. Behind him, twin doors swung open without a sound, revealing a second chamber cloaked in shadows. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor announced, his voice smooth and serpentine. "The time has come to honor our cherished tradition. Tonight we shall dance not for ourselves, but for the memory of love lost and love to come." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Eleanor's breath caught as Victor's gaze found hers again, unwavering and unnervingly direct. The guests moved as one, gliding toward the shadowed chamber, their movements fluid yet mechanical, like marionettes guided by invisible strings. Eleanor hesitated, every nerve in her body screaming for her to leave. "Don't linger," said the porcelain-faced woman from earlier, her hand brushing Eleanor's arm with a chill. "He dislikes hesitation." Eleanor followed reluctantly, her steps leaden. The chamber was vast yet claustrophobic, its walls draped in velvet black as if the very room sought to swallow light. A solitary chandelier hung high above, its candles burning crimson, casting flickering shadows that seemed alive. A circular platform dominated the center, adorned with a gilded mirror that reflected nothing but the ceiling above. Victor motioned Eleanor to join him on the platform. She froze, bile rising in her throat. "I'm not," she began, but the words faltered under his withering stare. He extended a hand, his smile widening. "You are the guest of honor, Eleanor. Surely you understand." She didn't, but something compelled her forward, her feet betraying her will. When her hand met Victor's, icy tendrils of dread snaked up her arm, He led her to the center, where the gilded mirror beneath her feet glinted faintly. Around her, the guests formed a circle, their faces devoid of warmth. Victor leaned in, his breath cool against her ear. "Tell me, Eleanor, have you ever loved?" She blinked, her voice caught in her throat. Images of half-formed memories surfaced, fragments of relationships that had fizzled or fractured, none strong enough to call love. I don't think so," she stammered. Victor's smile darkened. "No matter. Tonight, you shall know it, truly and deeply." The chandelier's crimson light intensified, bathing the chamber in an unsettling glow. The gilded mirror beneath Eleanor's feet shimmered, and she gasped as its surface rippled like liquid gold. Victor's hand left hers, and he stepped back into the circle, leaving her stranded in the center. The whispers began again, soft at first, then rising to an unbearable crescendo. The mirror beneath Eleanor's feet pulsed, and she saw her reflection change. Her own face stared back, but it was twisted with terror, her eyes wide with unspoken pleas. The reflection's lips moved, forming words she couldn't hear. She tried to step back, but her feet wouldn't move. The air grew heavier, pressing against her chest. The whispers coalesced into a single voice, a low, mournful wail that echoed through the chamber. "She is here." The voice didn't belong to Victor, nor to any of the guests. It was ancient, cracked with sorrow, and it filled Eleanor with the terrifying certainty that she was no longer alone in her own body. Eleanor's knees buckled as the voice enveloped her, heavy with despair and longing. The room blurred, and the circle of onlookers dissolved into the shadows. Only Victor remained, his presence looming as he extended a hand toward the rippling mirror. "Come forth," he commanded. The mirror erupted, its golden surface spilling upward like molten glass. From its depths emerged a figure, a woman draped in ethereal silks, her form glowing faintly as though lit from within. Her face was hauntingly beautiful, but her eyes were hollow pits of black. She turned to Victor, and something flickered between them, a bond forged in grief and time. Eleanor's paralysis broke, and she stumbled backward, nearly falling off the platform. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and the chill in the air gnawed at her skin. She had to escape. She couldn't stay. "You feel her, don't you?" Victor asked, his voice almost tender. "She resides within you now, my lost Anastasia." Eleanor shook her head frantically. "No, I'm not her. I don't belong here." Victor's expression hardened. "You were chosen, Eleanor, a vessel for her return. This is the purpose you were born for." Anastasia's ghostly form glided toward Eleanor, her hollow eyes fixed on her. Eleanor's limbs refused to obey her as the spirit reached out, her fingers brushing Eleanor's face with a touch like frostbite. "No," Eleanor whispered, tears streaking her cheeks. "This isn't right. I'm not her." In that moment, she remembered the locket she had found in the ballroom earlier, a golden trinket engraved with the initials AV. She fumbled for it in her pocket, clutching it tightly as a strange warmth spread through her hand. Instinctively, she thrust it toward the ghostly figure. "This belongs to you," she shouted, her voice trembling with desperation. "Take it and leave me." The locket glowed fiercely, its light cutting through the crimson haze. Anastasia recoiled, her form flickering. Victor's expression twisted into rage, and he lunged toward Eleanor, but the locket's light burst outward, forcing him back. The room trembled violently, and the mirror beneath Eleanor shattered, sending shards flying like golden daggers. The guests, no longer poised, but frantic, began to dissolve into the shadows, their forms unraveling like smoke. Anastasia's hollow eyes met Eleanor's one last time, and a faint smile touched her lips before she faded completely, her sorrowful wail dissipating into silence. Victor howled in despair, his form collapsing as the room crumbled around them. Eleanor bolted from the platform, dodging falling debris, her lungs burning with every breath. The chamber's darkness consumed itself, and she barely reached the ballroom before the entire manor began to collapse. Outside, the storm had cleared, and the moon shone cold and indifferent. Eleanor stood trembling in the garden, the shattered ruins of Thornrose Manor behind her. But the locket in her hand was still warm. The air outside was colder than Eleanor remembered, sharp and biting. Her breath fogged as she stumbled into the moonlit garden, her legs weak and trembling. Thornrose Manor crumbled behind her, stone by stone, the ballroom's glowing windows snuffed out like candles. For a moment, she thought it was over, that she had escaped. But the locket in her hand burned against her palm, a sinister warmth, pulsating as if alive. She unclasped her fingers and stared at it. The delicate golden surface was etched with intricate designs, and the initials AV shimmered faintly in the moonlight. It should have been a relic of the past, but instead, it felt disturbingly present, its pulse syncing with her own racing heartbeat. As she stood in the shadow of the crumbling manor, the surrounding garden seemed to twist and shift. The roses, once vibrant red, now wilted to a sickly black, their petals falling away like ash. The trees bent unnaturally, their branches clawing at the sky, and the wind carried faint whispers, soft, indistinct, but growing louder. She turned to leave, her instincts screaming to run, but her steps faltered. The locket was impossibly heavy now, its heat searing through her fingers. She tried to fling it away, but her hand refused to obey. Instead, her arm jerked upward, the locket dangling like a cursed talisman. "Eleanor!" The whisper carried her name, soft and sorrowful, but it pierced her like a knife. She froze, her pulse thundering in her ears. The voice was unmistakable. Anastasia. The sound of it wasn't just a memory. It was here, with her, circling like a predator waiting to strike. "You freed me," the voice continued, distant yet intimate. "But you have not finished." The locket's glow intensified, casting a pale, sickly light that painted the twisted garden in shades of decay. Eleanor felt her knees buckle as the earth beneath her feet seemed to shift, softening like mud, though the night was dry. She tried to scream, but her throat constricted, her breath hitching as the shadows in the garden began to converge. One by one, figures emerged from the gloom. First indistinct, they sharpened into shapes, gaunt faces, sunken eyes, and tattered clothes that clung to spectral bodies. These were the guests from the ball, their opulent costumes now ragged shrouds, their hollow stares fixed on her. They moved in a slow, deliberate circle, their heads tilting unnaturally as if examining her. "Why are you here?" Eleanor gasped, her voice breaking. "I ended this. I freed her." Victor's voice broke through the night, bitter and cruel. "You misunderstand, my dear. You freed Anastasia, yes, but freedom demands a price." The crowd parted, and Victor stepped forward, his once perfect suit now torn and streaked with black ichor. His face was pale and sunken, but his eyes blazed with an unholy light. "You bear the locket now," he said, his tone both mocking and reverent. "And with it, her burden. The ball is eternal, Eleanor, a dance that will never end. We needed a host to carry it forward." "No," Eleanor whispered, stepping back. "No, I'm not part of this." Victor laughed, the sound chilling in its emptiness. "You already are." The ground beneath her split open, a crack spiraling outward from where she stood. From the abyss rose the faint strains of the waltz, a haunting, mournful melody that pulled at her very soul. The spectral guests began to sway in unison, their steps slow and deliberate as they resumed their eternal dance. Their vacant eyes remained locked on her, pleading and condemning all at once. Eleanor's body betrayed her again. Her legs moved of their own accord, dragging her into the center of the circle. The locket blazed now, its heat coursing through her veins, binding her in place. Victor extended a hand toward her, his grin grotesque. "Shall we dance?" he asked, his voice dripping with malice. "No!" Eleanor screamed, summoning every ounce of strength to fight the invisible force gripping her. She twisted against it, her breath ragged. Her eyes darted around the garden, desperate for something, anything, that could save her. Her gaze landed on the ruins of Thornrose Manor. Amid the rubble, a jagged shard of the gilded mirror jutted from the earth. The sight of it sent a shockwave of clarity through her. The mirror had been Anastasia's prison, and perhaps it was the locket's as well. With a guttural cry, Eleanor lunged toward the shard. Pain shot through her body as she wrenched herself free from the unseen grip. The waltz's melody grew deafening, and the spectral dancers closed in, their ghostly hands reaching for her. She seized the shard, its jagged edge biting into her palm, and raised it above the locket. "End this," she shouted, her voice reverberating with desperation and fury. With a final scream, she drove the shard into the glowing heart of the locket. The world erupted in light, the waltz fractured into discordant notes, the spectral dancers collapsing into ash as a bone-deep wail tore through the garden. Victor's form dissolved, his screams swallowed by the light, and the locket shattered, its pieces scattering like dying embers. Eleanor fell to her knees, the earth solid beneath her again. The garden was silent now, the twisted trees and black roses reduced to dust. The ruins of Thornrose Manor stood still, lifeless. As she rose shakily, her eyes caught the faint glint of something in the rubble, the jagged shard of the mirror, its surface eerily smooth. For the briefest moment, she saw her reflection, not her own, but Anastasia's, smiling faintly. The shard cracked, then crumbled to dust. Eleanor left the garden without looking back, the chilling echo of the waltz following her into the night. Though the ball had ended, she knew the memory of it would haunt her forever,